Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I am your host, Eric Smith, and today I'm talking about Exploring the Labyrinth, Volume 1 by Kit Power. Kit Power reading Brian Keene. We have a foreword by Eric LaRocca, and this is from French Press Publishing, or French Press Books. Basically what this is, Kit Power, a wonderful writer in his own right of both fiction and nonfiction, decided to read Brian Keene's stuff. He had never read it before 2016, 2017. Decided to read his stuff. Let's see if I look at the very first one, because he has dates for when he posted these. 2017. Decided to read basically from start to finish all of his, as it says on the back, full-length fiction pieces from Brian Keene. And these are the essays that he has written about them. They were originally started as being posted on Ginger Nuts of Horror, and then it moved to Uncomfortably Dark. And it covers from The Rising in 2003 to Alone in 2011. And it's just Kit Power throwing down his thoughts about the works of Brian Keene. So this isn't a thing that's going to be tying all the stories together and talking about all the crossover bits. There's a little bit of that, mentioning things, but this isn't a deep dive into the labyrinth itself. It's just a horror fan and a horror author reading the works of another horror author and putting his thoughts down. So, hopefully that all made sense. For the too long didn't watch, folks, I gave this a 5 out of 5. I absolutely loved it. Now, I am a fan of Kit Power, and I'm also a big fan of Brian Keene. Brian Keene is, I always say, as far as I know, looking around, looking at other authors and books and things, Brian Keene's top 3 for me. I'm just a huge fan of his work. So, yes, 5 out of 5 stars. Now, first of all, Kit Power starts with Clickers, which was not written by Brian Keene. But because Brian Keene co-wrote 3 Clickers novels with J.F. Gonzalez, Power thought that might be a good place to start. So the first essay in this book is Clickers by J.F. Gonzalez and Mark Williams. And so he's sort of setting a little bit of a foundation for what's going to come later. I'm not going to go over every single essay in this book, just to say, I have read some of Kit's nonfiction before. He has 2 volumes of his long-running series of essays, My Life in Horror. I've read the first one. I've not read the second one yet. And that covers basically anything in horror, whereas this laser focused on Brian Keene. But it's a very personal writing style. He's talks about the themes and the things he's seeing in the books. So this isn't a deep dive into the literature, although that is there. It's a shallow dive into the literature of the work. It's also just Kit sharing his opinions of the work, what may have worked for him, what didn't. And towards the end, we get some brutal honesty from Kit Power himself, as some of what he's reading echoes what's going on in his own life. Oh, and I didn't even mention, at the end, there's an interview between Kit Power and Brian Keene, and there's at least one point where Mr. Keene says, this is going to be an exclusive for this interview, and then talks about something. And this says, an exclusive, heartbreakingly intimate interview you'll never find anywhere else. That's what it says on the back cover. So, yeah, I think this is fantastically written. As a fan of both Kit Power and Brian Keene, I very much enjoyed it. I like Kit Power's insights into the works. things that I didn't necessarily pick up because I'm a very surface reader. Unless you're, I don't know if hitting me over the head is necessarily how hard you have to go for me to pick up on things. But if it's real deep, I'm not going to find it. Now, going through all of this, I believe there's only 2 things in here of all the stuff in here, all the books, all the novellas. I think there's only 2 things that I did not read. And I have both of those things. And that is, let's see, where is the first one? Shades, which Brian Keene co-wrote with Jeff Cooper. And I have it right up there, and I have not read that one. But I went ahead and read the essay. I don't think, there are spoilers in here, because he's diving into these books. But he does try to avoid very specific spoilers. So he will say things that, yes, are going to, he goes over the story generally. And so it's definitely going to spoil at least story beats, but not necessarily some of the very specific things that happen. Although, I mean, in The Rising, he does talk about the ending very specifically. But, so Shades, I haven't read it yet, but I don't think reading this essay is going to in any way ruin my enjoyment of that book. And then the other one that I haven't read is Entombed. Excuse me. And again, although I think he gets even more specific when he's talking about Entombed than he does with Shades, but I don't think it's going to spoil my enjoyment of that book in any way. Conversely, there are a couple things in here that I'm like 99% positive I read. In one case, I'm 100% positive I read it, but I do not know how, because I do not have them on my shelf, and I don't know that they're in any of like the short story collections or anything. I'm talking about, let's see, where's the one? Take the Long Way Home. I'm almost certain I've read that, but I don't have a copy of it, so I don't know how I would have read it. Tequila's Sunrise. I know I've read that. I'm 99% sure I've read that. Don't know where I read it. Jack's Magic Beans. That one I'm 100% certain I've read. Don't know where I read it. But everything else in here, from Clickers, The Rising City, I will read off everything that's in here. Just won't talk specifically about the essays. But Clickers, The Rising City of the Dead Terminal, Earthworm Gods, also published as The Conqueror Worms, Dark Hollow, also published as The Rutting Season, and I read it as both. Whitefire, Ghoul, The Rising, Selected Scenes from the End of the World, Take the Long Way Home, Tequila's Sunrise, Dead Sea, Shades with Jeff Cooper, Jack's Magic Beans, Clickers 2, The New Wave with J.F. Gonzalez, Kill Whitey, Ghost Walk, Earthworm Gods, Selected Scenes from the End of the World, Castaways, Urban Gothic, An Occurrence in Crazy Bear Valley. I've read that one. I don't know how I read it because I don't have a copy of it on my shelf. Terminal Author's Preferred Edition. Okay, technically, I have not read that. I have it, but I haven't read it. And Kit Power does talk about the fact that this is a brand new book, relatively speaking, so it doesn't actually fit in chronological order that he's supposed to be reading these things, but he felt that since he'd already talked about the original and the original edition, that he would, when the author's preferred edition came out, he should throw that into here. So that's technically the third one that I haven't read. Clickers 3, Dagon Rising with J.F. Gonzalez, Darkness on the Edge of Town, The Cage, another one that I've read that I don't know Where, because I don't have a copy of it. Scratch, A Gathering of Crows, The Girl on the Glider, The Rising, Deliverance, Entombed, and Alone. And then we have the interview. So those are all the things that are covered. And as I said, we start out with sort of your basic Kit Power, talking about what he's read, talking about his feelings about it, his thoughts on it, and getting into some of the themes and things. And there's one, now I don't remember which one off the top of my head, that he feels that he did not enjoy as much as he may have because of what was going on in the world at the time that he was reading it. A little too close to home kind of thing. Which is interesting. And it made me think about the fact that I chose to read The Stand during COVID, right when lockdown hit. I'm like, this is the perfect time to read The Stand. And frankly, didn't bother me at all. But anyway, as the essays progress, there is a point where there's basically a hiatus because of things that were going on in Kit Power's life, in the world. And then after that, he gets back into it. That may be the point where it goes from Ginger Nuts of Horror to Uncomfortably Dark. But the essays towards the end start to get very, very personal. Because with, I think it's The Girl on the Glider, which is actually the first Brian Keene book that Kit Power ever read. Power had taken a hiatus, essentially, from reading horror. Quite a few years where he was not reading horror at all. When he came back to it, he'd been hearing about this Brian Keene guy all the time, and had been listening to Keene's podcast, The Horror Show, with Brian Keene. So he decided to pick up The Girl on the Glider and read it. And after reading that is when he decided, I'm going to go back and start at the beginning and do this thing. But, excuse me, I think it's The Girl on the Glider where Power talks about how Brian Keene really opens up, bleeds onto the page, as it were. And Power talks about Keene's honesty in what he's writing in Girl on the Glider. And so Power says, basically, paraphrasing all of this, basically he says, if Keene's going to be that honest, I have to be that honest. And so Kit Power opens up, and he talks about things that were going on in his life at the time that he was writing these particular essays towards the end of this book. And I think it's a very brave thing to do. And some of the things discussed in the interview with Keene, I think it's very brave for Brian Keene to talk about some of these things. Big fans, I think. I mean, obviously, I think his friends are going to know some of this stuff. And people who have read, especially his nonfiction work, are probably going to, if not know some of this stuff, have suspected some of this stuff, but now it's out in the open, some of these things. So I feel like there was one other thing, and then it slipped my mind. But 5 out of 5 stars for Exploring the Labyrinth, Volume 1, by Kit Power. Just a fantastic look at the works of Brian Keene. If you're a Brian Keene fan, I think you absolutely have to pick this up. If you're anti-Brian Keene, and I'm sure there are people out there who are at least not necessarily fans of Brian Keene's work, maybe pick this up and see if maybe you missed something, and you can go back and give Mr. Keene another try. Or not. I'm not your boss. I can't tell you what to do, but I can Just highly recommend this. I really need to read Kit Power's My Life in Horror Volume 2, as well as some of his other fiction, because I'm a big fan of both his fiction and nonfiction at this point. I'm still not thinking of what it was that slipped my mind, so I guess that will be the end of that. Exploring the Labyrinth, Volume 1. Can't wait for Volume 2, but it'll be a little while. And when we get into Volume 2, we're going to start getting into the stuff that I have not read. I have a bunch of Brian Keene stuff that I just have not read. The first essay that's going to be in Volume 2, because Kit Power has talked about that, is a book that I have. I've had it since it came out. Haven't read it. And Power does talk about how he reads one book ahead. So, like, he read The Rising, and then he read City of the Dead before he went back and wrote the essay on The Rising. And so that's what he's done. And so at the point, after reading Alone, before he wrote that essay, he went ahead and has already read the next book. That will be the first book in the next volume. But just looking at my shelf, I could point out just right there. There's 3 I haven't read. There's a couple I haven't read. There's Entombed, and there's Shades, and there's a lot of the newer stuff I haven't read, but there's some of the older stuff, relatively speaking at this point, that I haven't read. So I may have to catch up. I may have to read all that stuff before the next volume comes out, because I was willing to read a couple of essays about books I hadn't read yet, but I don't want the majority to be books I haven't read yet. So I'm going to have to start digging into the Brian Keene. I guess that's all there is to say about that. I'm not going to repeat all this other stuff and my rating again. Well, I'm going to repeat the rating again. 5 out of 5. Absolutely fantastic. So, question for this video: are you a fan of Brian Keene? If you are, what's your favorite? What do you like about his stuff? If you aren't, why not? And that's not a, hey man, why aren't you a fan? He's great. Just why not? What is it about him that you don't like? Obviously, I'm a fan of Brian Keene. And, Brian Keene calls himself a mid-lister, which I suppose is true. I tried to get Fetch to happen. That's a Mean Girls reference, for those of you who might not know. I called Brian Keene something. I can't remember what it was now. I don't think it was as simple as like the king of pulp horror. I know it was about pulp horror. I can't remember what the phrase was that I feel like I made up, but I'd never used it again, and I've never heard anyone else say it. But he is amazing at pulp horror, and but I'm not sure. Just because something is pulp doesn't mean it's bad, or doesn't mean it doesn't have depth. Maybe that's the better way to put it. Brian Keene writes fantastic characters, which Kit Power gets into. Fantastic characters, fantastic stories, generally great pacing, and he's tying everything together. He's writing his 7 book. I don't know how many books it's going to be. His magnum opus, the Labyrinth books, tying everything together. The first 3 are out, and tons of nonfiction. And while not everything hits completely for me, I have my favorites, and I have those that I'm like, yeah, this was good. Some that I'd give maybe 3.5 stars. I liked it. Maybe even more than liked it. not necessarily going to say I really liked it or I loved it, but there are so many that I would say I loved it. Um, so I agree with, not that this should matter as far as uh, reading the man's work, but since he writes a lot of nonfiction, and I've read a lot of his nonfiction, I agree with him about 75% of the time on his opinions and different things. But there's that 25%, I've mentioned this before, where occasionally I'm like, kind of a jerk thing, man. But hey, that's life. But overall, I mean, I'm a jerk most of the time. Um, so I've never had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Keene, and I'm upset personally. I'm upset that he's closing down his comic book / bookstore, because that just sucks. That the economy essentially drove it out of business. But personally, it sucks because I'd planned on going there and checking it out, and now I'm not going to have the chance to do that because it's closing down. Um, but I think overall, Keene is a good guy. Well, I know he's a good guy. Um, and well, again, haven't met him. From everything I've ever heard or read, I know that he's a good guy. But a flawed man. But as far as his work goes, as I said, he's in my top 3 authors. If someone put a gun to my head, I'd have to go, and this isn't necessarily in order, but possibly Joe Lansdale, number 1. Brian Keene is going to be number 2 or 3. The other person that would be either 2 or 3, I'm not really sure. It would probably depend on my mood. Do I say Edward Lee? Do I say Stephen King? I don't know that Stephen King is in my top 3. Robert B. Parker. But I haven't read everything that dude wrote. I've read most of it before he passed. But yes, so Brian Keene is definitely in my top 3. So huge fan. That was really rambly. What about you? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here at the Low Budget Review Show. Please like, share, and subscribe. All the usual YouTube stuff. If you'd care to follow me on other social media, I'll have links for my Instagram and Blue Sky in the description below. And that's all I've got. This has been the Low Budget Review Show. I have been Eric Smith. And until next time, read more books.